Welcome to Indianomics. India completes 77 years of independence, and at this emotional juncture, I thought it fit to invite one of India's longest-serving policymakers, Dr. C. Rangarajan. Dr. Rangarajan was Reserve Bank Governor from 1992 to 1997, during which time he converted the dollar-rupee from an administered rate to a market-driven exchange rate. Bank lending and deposit rates, which were set by the Reserve Bank, were liberalized. And the government's unlimited power to borrow was also ended. In short, a lot of revolutionary steps. Dr. Rangarajan, of course, continued his innings of policy making as the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council from 2004 to 2014. In between, he was also chairman of the 12th Finance Commission. And of course, he headed numerous other important committees and commissions, notably like the Statistics Commission. I don't think we can get a wiser voice to glance at the past 77 years and guide us about the future than Padma Vibhushan Dr. Rangarajan. Sir, thank you very much indeed for joining us on a very auspicious day.
Okay, thank you.
Well, first up, sir, you've seen a better part of this 77 years and 37 of those as actually policy maker. What would you say is the biggest achievement of the Indian economy?
Well, India is now described as the fifth largest economy in the world. Of course, we are a big country. We have a huge population. That itself gives us a large economy. Nevertheless, I think that as compared to what it was in 2 decades ago, coming up to the level of the fifth largest economy is an achievement by itself, though there are other important problems. Secondly, I would say that we have achieved self-sufficiency in food grain. That is a very important development when you look at what we were and how difficult the food situation was in India in the 50s and 60s. Thirdly, I would say that in the case of the service industry, particularly the computer-related service industries, we have done very well, and we are counted as one of the largest exporters of these services by the others. Therefore, and I perhaps also should mention that we do have a reasonably strong industrial base capable of producing a variety of capital goods, intermediate goods, and consumer goods. Also, I will mention as lastly that India's fertility rate has come down to close to 2, and therefore in another 2 decades, perhaps, the population will stabilize. Though we should have taken much earlier action, nevertheless, it's a fact that we are now at a level or at a stage where we can say that in 2 decades from now, the population will stabilize.
Well, coming to 1991 itself, what do you think was the toughest and the biggest achievement at that time?
Well, the point is that there were 2 things. One was to manage the crisis, because we had to get out of the crisis.
Yes.
That in 1990 and then 1991.
Yes.
Steps had to be taken, first of all, to stabilize. And then we felt that after stabilizing, we need to reform the economy. Because it is not a question of just simply solving the problem, the balance of payments problem of 90 or 91. We have to build an economy which will not face such crises from time to time. And therefore, we moved on to introduce reforms. And that started almost in 1991, and it picked up speed in the next years. And then it was followed up by various governments. I would say the decision to devalue in a deep way in 2 states, and even to shift gold in a 1991 period in order to overcome some of the problems are difficult decisions, and they had to be taken. But the most important thing is we did not stop with solving the problems, but moved on to make reforms. And if I would say in a short sentence, that we made a break with the past in three important ways. One, we dismantled the complex system of permits and licenses and controls that dominated the system. Second, we redefined the role of the state. And thirdly, we gave up the policy of import substitution at any cost and decided to embrace the international trade.
So I will come back to the policies that you have mentioned, because we seem to be going back to some of those policies, especially import substitution, under a diluted version called Atmanirbhar. But more on that later. Let me come to the way in which we handle public sector banks, because that came directly under the Reserve Bank. You know, under you and, of course, Dr. Manmohan Singh and the others, you all got first State Bank listed, and eventually through the decade, other public sector banks got listed. But since then, we have not made any major change in the governance of public sector banks. What would you advise? Some time ago, your deputy at that time, Dr. Reddy, had said that they should be brought under the Companies Act. What would your advice be to the current regime?
No, I think the most important point is that several steps were taken to introduce and to initiate a competitive system in the banking system. In the final analysis, it is competition that will finally lead to efficiency in the system. And that attempt was taken care of by allowing new private sector banks into the banking industry. It's by time. And as a result of it, I think we do have a situation in which almost 30% of the banking system is now in the private sector. So we really need to ensure that this competitive system does remain. And we really have to ensure that the public sector banks, in order to survive and grow, need to be very competitive. But you were asking about the governance and so on. I think the most important thing is that the board of directors and how they are nominated and how they are selected is a key thing. In the final analysis, the management of a bank rests with the board of directors. And therefore, the key thing that I would really recommend is ensure a proper system of selection of people to the board of directors and make the board of directors as a whole responsible for the functioning of the banking system. And that, I think, is a critical variable in making the banking system more efficient.
Your point is taken, sir. I think that's what Dr. Reddy also argued in 2000 and later on the PJ Nayak committee in 2013, that bringing under the Companies Act, the board gets more powerful, they get independent directors, and maybe that will introduce the governance element. Also, the government can't use PSU banks for their schemes like Mudra, etc., which ties them down and leaves private sector banks a little freer. So I will, time permitting, ask you more about the banking system, but you also wrote in the Hindu about how we should chase our new goal of a Viksit Bharat, a developed India, by 2047. What would you say should be the first 2 or 3 major policy changes we need to do?
First of all, I think in order to be a developed country, our per capita income has to move from the current level of something like $2,500 to $13,000. And this requires, according to the calculations made by several, on some assumptions regarding the price level, inflation, and the exchange rate, we need to grow at between 6 and 7%, but perhaps closer to 7%. This requires that the gross fixed capital formation rate, or the investment rate, let us say, has to be about 35% if we assume an incremental capital output ratio of 5:1. I think the incremental capital output ratio in recent period has been around 5. Therefore, the first thing that we really need to do is that we ensure that the investment rate in the country remains at 35% of GDP. And that is critical if we really want to become a developed country. We are close to it. I think we are now about 33.3% of the GDP. And therefore, it is not something that is it's beyond us. But but there is one point there. The recent increase in investment rate has been because of the increase in capital expenditures by the government of India. That is not the answer. I think the real answer lies in the private investment picking up, because the increase in capital expenditure or by the central government has also been followed by high fiscal deficit. And you look at the fiscal deficit of the government of India in the last 4 years, they are way above the 3% of the GDP, which was considered to be the appropriate. Therefore, we have to create appropriate investment, the climate for private investment to pick up. So that is one of the important things that we have to do.
Yeah.
The second thing is on the strategy of development. I think the government must have some idea. And I would say that the strategy of development must be multidimensional. The East Asian tigers adopted a single goal, like export-led growth.
Yes.
Now, that export-led growth is not possible now. First of all, the developed countries are not growing that fast. Second of all, there is a change in the attitude of the developed countries in terms of free trade. Therefore, while the exports are important, the external demand is important. And in some sense, exports are critical test of efficiency of the economy. Therefore, we cannot ignore exports. But it is not the export-led strategy that will really lead us to a higher level. And I would really say that we really need to have a multidimensional approach to strategy of development. And the third point that I would mention is that the most or the biggest challenge that is that India will have to face is about jobs and employment.
Yes.
The fact is that the employment growth is not as fast as the income growth. It is true, jobless growth is bad, but jobs without growth is not sustainable.
Yes.
Let us not say that let us fill the vacancies in the government of India or the state governments. That's not the way to go about. I think the real problem is going to be that the new technologies that are looming in the horizon are going to make the problem even more difficult. The developed countries in Europe are today now talking about a 4-day weekend rather than a 2-day week. I mean, 4-day week rather than a 5-day
week.
So this is the way in which the direction is moving. Or what I would say is the employment elasticity with respect to income is coming down. How to solve the problem? Solving the problem, simple problem is, you can say, why are you growing at 7%? Why don't you grow at 8%? Now, that is not going to be very easy also because of so many other considerations, including environmental control, the need to control emissions, and so on and so forth. The thing is that even in spite of the induction of high technology, there are sectors of the economy which are relatively more labor intensive. I would suggest like food processing industry. I think what is really required is a combination of sectors of the economy, which will be partly highly
labor intensive,
not capital intensive, that high technology intensive, and sectors of economy which are relatively more labor intensive. I think that is the only way in which we can really solve the problem.
Well, that's it on this very special edition of Independence Day Indianomics. Thanks for watching.